So it's quite common for small startups to be quite scrappy. But then as you get bigger, the people that you're bringing in, are you kind of suggesting there that as an organization evolves and gets bigger, we do have to look for people that maybe wouldn't have fitted our original culture, but will fit a new culture that we're aiming for?
Exactly. And I'm looking this as from the lens of a founder myself. Sometimes you need different parts of the organization to balance themselves.
Welcome to the Product Agility Podcast, the missing link between agile and product. The purpose of this podcast is to share practical tips, strategies, and stories from world-class thought leaders and practitioners. Why, I hear you ask? Well, I want to increase your knowledge and your motivation to experiment so that together we can create ever more successful products. My name is Ben Maynard, and I'm your host. What has driven me for the last decade to bridge the gap between agility and product is a deep-rooted belief that people and products evolving together can achieve mutual excellence.
Hello and welcome once again to the Product Agility Podcast. Now we are joined by Mirela Mus. What I have been very much looking forward to with this conversation with Mirela is the fact that Mirela's got a huge amount of experience in many different domains, ones that I could only dream on, given her role in product people. And so our conversations today are going to be focusing on some of the problems which plague many product organizations, and hopefully not my own, because one of the first problems we're going to be looking at is the failure to launch. What is it that gets in the way of a good idea actually getting to market, let alone being a success? And then we're also going to be looking at the right fit. But how do we know who's the right fit for our organization? Now, we had Dave Bowie on a number of weeks or months ago talking about what he thought was great fit for our hard slides. And Mirela's going to be taking a different angle on this, talking from her vast experience about some of the things which actually she's found when you don't get that right fit. Now, before we get into the very meat of this all, I suppose I should really let all of you know who Mirela is, because Mirela, you contacted me after our stint at Productized and asked, would you be interested in having me on a podcast? You're the founder and CPO of Product People, which is Europe's premier destination for product management in services in Europe. You've got 40 in-house product management consultants. You run over 100 client missions every year, which is just crazy. Right? So much work. And you personally serve clients as well. You keep your hand in the game, even helping out the World Health Organization. And also what I love, because everyone knows I'm a nerd, is you've got a background in computer science and you've been doing product management for 12 years. So Mirela, thank you very much for coming along.
Excited to be here and excited to talk about product catastrophes.
Yes, product catastrophes and how to avoid them, hopefully how to avoid them. So Mirela, catastrophe number one, the failure to launch. This is something which has plagued many product organizations and will continue to plague many product organizations. I would even say this accounts for many of the failures that we find in large organizations who are trying to release internal products or have some internal work they're trying to get off the ground. And you've got a story from your experience, which you'd like to share with us.
Absolutely. So when you think about this, usually these stories, you would assume it's on delivery side. And that was also the first thing I looked back then is we need to be doing this in time, because it was a pretty early stage company, had a limited runway and a clear scope. It was also during the crypto hype, and usually that is come in waves, so you need to catch it while it's there. To start with the conclusion, the failure to launch was regulatory. Management changing the country where this is regulated in quite often, and probably my fault for not being able to pin them down into which jurisdiction will we be in, because we kept being in this one and that one.
That's huge. Having worked in finance for many years, I know how different country regulators can be and the different hoops and hurdles you have to jump through to get something to market or to maintain a certain position in the market. And so if they kept on changing that, that's really difficult to keep up with.
Yes. So in the beginning, probably it was also my fault, as I thought we are all agreed on. So when we kicked off building the MVP, where we got an external company, we went to the regulation of, let's say, country number one. And then later on, as we go along with this and so on, we see that legal comes up and I keep hearing this discussion about country number two and that they were setting up a legal entity there. And at some point they're like, oh no, we changed our mind. We don't want to be in this one. We think it's too much of a risk for us. what are the changes needed to be now in country number 2. And at some point I've ended up like rolling off and moving on. But if I pin it down, or like what happened, why couldn't we go live, it was because this kept changing very often, to the point that I don't know if it should have been me or someone pushing and saying, okay, which country are we launching, and what are the steps? As initially, the way it came from C-levels and the founders was like, okay, we have it all sorted out. You people just need to build, which again, probably I shouldn't have taken that at face value, but I assume that the regulation part is the hardest one to choose or change, like you also said. And that is not something you change lightly, and especially after you've spent a bit building an MVP with an external company. And I think this is also important for founders in their early stage, rather sticking to doing something and getting the user feedback, because the farthest we went out was with a closed beta, right? So we never went live for real customer money, while at the same time following the plan that we had of going live. So we paid for an ID verification subscription that logs you in for 1 year, paying for the company that built the MVP, and all of these costs. So next time I will know that tech is not the bottleneck, or tech is mostly blamed as the bottleneck, but now I've changed my mind, and it can also just be on legal or management switching cornerstone decisions without too much transparency or documented or explained why that has happened. Because maybe that could have been like the thing to change, to at least say, yes, this has happened and these are the reasons why it happened, and would have been more helpful for the people doing this.
What was your role?
I was a leading product. So it was quite early stage. I think calling it CPO is too much. But I was leading a team of 2 to 4 PMs, depending at which phase we were on. Because we also work with a few external people to get this off the ground. As you also mentioned, you have experience in regulated products. So there's a bit of heavy lifting you need to set this up in the beginning, to make sure you're compliant with know your customer, anti-money laundering, and so on and so forth.
What I find, I suppose, kind of sad in a way, because it's a story that plays out in many different forms, is that the people that are leading the product aren't engaged in those really critical conversations about, for example, which country are you going to go live in first? And there seems to be then perhaps, I think, a naivety with some founders as to the complexities of what it is you're trying to achieve, and whether naivety on about what it is to deliver, like the actual act of creating the thing, the difficulties within that, and how do you make sure it's maintainable or extendable. But then also there's like deep legal and regulatory knowledge and experience, which is also required. So I suppose if people were going to be looking to avoid this failure to launch, and you were to offer a piece of advice, what would be the biggest piece of advice you could offer to people who find themselves in these types of situations?
Yeah, I would say that speed is of the essence. And now we do have the case, right, where you see that you need to pay attention to regulatory compliance. So one part that I would like to step back in what I said is not necessarily the country in which you launch it, is from which legal entity are you launching that then governs your ways of working. So if we look at Revolut doesn't have a banking license in the UK, right, while still being one of Europe's banking unicorns. Your bank account is in Lithuania or in other places. So that was the level of complexity in this case as well. Where should this, for Revolut is Lithuania, where should the Lithuania of this company be?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so it's quite complex, because for which country we'll be operating in, its usual crypto playbook, leaving the US alone. So the US citizens wouldn't have been onboarded on this platform in the beginning, or they would have needed like a separate legal entity, the whole separation. And then there were a few other cases where you are not allowed to take money from, like the sanctioned countries and so on. So that part, to be honest, isn't what I didn't feel it was that hard. The harder part was the legal entity operating the whole thing and how much this impacted the product. And it was probably also a lack of experience from my side for not understanding these complexities, which now I see that even a banking unicorn has troubles with.
I wonder, is some of this to do with humility a little bit as well? Anybody in a leadership role who can't possibly know it all, especially as things become more complex, is who can you have around for you? Who can you either delegate to, or who can you learn from? And what it sounds like here, with the failure to launch, is there was a failure to learn together and have everyone involved in some of those critical decisions. Because the decision as to which legal entity it was, is a decision which is just happens in isolation. It has those broader impacts further down the line. And like you said, there's a whole heap of stuff that needs to be ticked off before you can even go live in a certain jurisdiction with a certain legal entity because of the regulatory compliance aspect of it. So it's not like you can just get your MVP to market. Actually has to tick a huge number of different boxes and be compliant and be, I suppose, accepted by the regulators. So that minimum viable product is actually quite a, I suppose it would have been quite a large product.
Yeah, so on the product side, it was relatively light, as we managed to scope it down quite well while delivering the value people were looking at. So it's kind of funny because on that part, I'm quite proud of managing up to the founders and also figuring out what's on the market, how are we going to position ourselves, what are we going to do. But there was this complexifier that made it not happen, which was quite sad.
Okay. So if we think about this and this failure to launch, lots of specialist knowledge, conversations happening that weren't shared, didn't involve enough people, which led to various decisions being made, which made the product not viable to release. So then let's say that you have got a product out to market, or your product is live internally because it's an internal product, however it might work out. Maybe there's a conversation to have around some of your catastrophes you've seen around not having the right fit of person. And I suppose given the nature of product people, this is something which you must have some level of exposure to, because you're brought in to help fill gaps which have occurred either unexpectedly or perhaps they were planned. And as a consequence, you must hear quite a few stories and see quite a few situations where people maybe weren't the right fit, or maybe a first-hand experience of where yourself or people you were close to in your organization weren't the right fit. So have you got some good catastrophes for us there, Mirela?
Sure. I think the fit that probably is the most intuitive is you have the person who's great at a certain company stage or culture, and then they don't work out mostly because of that. So we did see the example where someone coming from corporate back when we were about 10 people, so it was very early stage for us, very process light and so on, and this person was extremely frustrated due to lack of processes and also quite unforgiving of how things are, that this is not a publicly listed company as their previous workplace, right? So that was also a mistake on the product people side, that we didn't adjust to also and to explain to people, hey, you're coming here, things are messy, and things are even messier due to consulting. Since then, we've hardened and improved internal processes quite strongly, to the point where people are like, wow, this is more organized than in larger organizations I've been at. But at the same time, while we're organized internally, whenever we get into a new place, it tends to be a bit chaotic because people don't bring us in immediately, so things fall apart a bit, or they bring us in at a time that is not great for them. Otherwise, the willingness to pay wouldn't be there. And why would they pay premium for externals if things are fine? Things need to go south a little bit for this to be even considered. So that's where it came from on our side. On our client, it depends quite a lot. Sometimes it's just culture. And I've also noticed for us as well, it's very hard to grasp the culture fit just through the interview process. For example, Amazon has the more brutal approach with the bar raiser interview, where it kind of brings someone in that pushes back on the people during the interview and to understand how they manage frustration. So the example would be like, Ben, you want to launch a new payment method in Argentina, walk us through what you do. And you say, I will do this and that. It's like, oh, no way, legal is blocking that. Then I will try this. Oh, no, this is a problem with the regulator. Then I want to do that. Oh, no, platform doesn't have capacity until Q2 support your change, and so on and so forth. So they go at this for a while and to see like, how does the person react to just like continuous frustrations. And this is one way of doing it. For us, we did notice the culture fit emerges in the first 3 months, where we had people on their side saying they don't feel this is a fit. And for us, it's usually slower because we try to like give people time to warm up, so we won't make a decision as fast. And maybe there's another one where I think it's at company size. And I did notice in one company where I was at in the past that and ended up going into insolvency due to process failure. So they're a managed marketplace for luxury watches. So let's say if you own a Rolex and you want to sell it, you maybe don't want to meet with a person under a bridge and end up being robbed or so on. So you can hand your watch over to a third-party service that will do everything for you, including getting the payment from consumers. And for consumers, they can offer installments, the certification, and a warranty in case something happens with the watch for 12 months or so. So it's a win-win for all sides. What happened with this platform is that they needed to store a large amount of value, but the general culture there was build fast and break things, as the whole experience of the people building this had been mostly companies marketing heavy that didn't own any physical thing, especially of these values. So a lot of the things that were also happening while I was there was that once in a while one of these watches got stolen. There were a few fraud issues which could solve because they were on the digital side. There were a few on the package pickup side, which they solved by making the packages very ugly. They look like a shoebox, and setting up a separate company with a nondescript name that sends them. But end of this became from just a lack of process maturity, where the whole storage where these watches were held was robbed during a weekend. And basically the company had to go insolvent because these were other people's watches that they wouldn't have had the whole capital to cover. And that's my most assumption, because the DNA was very scrappy, very do things at the last minute, just adapt to things as they come. And that was normal. Back when I was with them, it was Series B. So at Series B, it's fine for things to be scrappy. But at the same time, they didn't have this large loss of inventory. It was most of the time someone left the door open and a watch disappeared, or sort of things that were being improved over time, to the point that the area where the watches were stored was very limited access and so on. But you would have needed a sort of Pentagon security, because they're quite small objects and quite large in value. And generally the people handling these, it's sometimes 5 salaries for them. So you could understand that it's also like not someone's favorite job to carry things around, right? But they're the ones handling these the most often.
Yeah. Actually, yeah, it's really fascinating, because you think of software, purely technical based products, and then the culture fit is about how well they fit into the organization. But then you add some kind of physical, tangible thing in there, which is a high value. Then it's more about saying, well, the people that are going to be handling these things, the very lifeblood of our organization, do they fit into the culture? Are they trustworthy enough? That's a very difficult problem to solve for people. And I think what you're saying there reminded me of a lady called Marsha Acker. She talks about system dynamics and about operating systems in communication. And what you're saying, that kind of scrappy, let's just do things, let's keep it very kind of loose, that kind of randomness to it all works when you're small. And I suppose you then attract people who are attracted to that scrappiness. Then it gets to a point where things slowly get a bit more formal and a bit more understood, and it becomes more of a closed system or an open system, and then ends up being a closed system because you end up with lots of rules and processes and hierarchy and structure. But Marsha makes the point that everyone needs to know what operating system they're working within, and perhaps the operating system needs to change over time. So I suppose that cultural fit, so it's quite common for small startups to be quite scrappy, but then as you get bigger, the people that you're bringing in, are you kind of suggesting there that we, as an organization evolves and gets bigger, we do have to look for people that maybe wouldn't have fitted our original culture, but will fit a new culture that we're aiming for?
Exactly. And also I'm looking this from the lens of a founder myself. Sometimes you need different parts. So I would expect our product management consultants to be very accommodating and friendly, at the same time get things done for the clients and so on. But from the operations and compliance side, people can be less accommodating, because compliance and operational excellence is the one who needs to go first, while of course still being candid to each other and so on. But I would expect less flexibility there, because we don't want to not be compliant and get fined. We also want to have a certain level of quality that we operate at all clients, and that then needs to be prioritized over certain flexibility and be less accommodating to people. The same thing with invoice payments, right? Invoice payments have a time frame, so we can accommodate a delay, but after some delay, this will just go to our external legal support. And it's not because we don't want to be accommodating and friendly, but this is how things work, and a company cannot operate without money, and our people need to be paid monthly and get their bonuses and get their salary increases when relevant and so on. So that's more how I would see it. At some point, you have certain areas of the companies that operate differently, even if they're all under all the same umbrella.
So if we talk about that umbrella, and let's call it a cultural umbrella, if that makes sense, they're all under the same cultural umbrella. What advice do you have for people then that are worried about this potential catastrophe of not having the right people, or knowing different departments, they have different ways of working, they have different goals, and then we're this shape now, but we're going to be that shape in the future? How would you then describe that culture as that umbrella? Because it strikes me, if each department has specific goals and specific things they're working for, like how would you then explain to someone what that cultural umbrella is?
Usually you have principles. So at Product People, we have 5 principles that we go for, and when we do performance reviews, this is also for everyone in every department. They are ranked by their adherence to our principles. The other way you could enforce it is that the principles will overcome performance. If in check, let's say someone performs very well, but is in violation with your principle of one of ours is being excellent and candid to each other, or optimize for long-term profitability and growth. So if they systemically are in contrasting with this principle, then you need to make a choice if you want to preserve the culture despite that person performing well. So in our case, we've made at some point a choice that even if someone performs well and can be liked by clients and so on, we would not accept that they are not compliant with our principles, because that makes things so much more difficult internally, and it also removes predictability, which we value more, especially as an agency and service provider. Our clients want something consistent from us, and we want something that's reliable at a certain level from our people.
Yeah, I'm sure
this is how I would explain.
That must lead to some difficult conversations at times, and when people are objectively, like, I don't know, hitting some targets, or they're getting good client feedback, but they're not meeting the internal principles. Do you have to, and this is probably, I don't know, if I find it really interesting. I made my life harder then in the edit, having to chop out all of my British stumbling over my words there. I apologize. But when you have an internal set of principles and you have your people then going out to clients, do you expect them to be upholding those principles whilst at the client, or do you expect them to kind of morph into the client organization principles and then only exhibit the product people principles when they're back in the office?
What we're lucky with is lots of our clients are very compatible with us culturally. We did flag that there are some client types that are a bit less compatible, the ones that have a bit of a back channeling culture, the ones that prefer to be too much in person, because then they take some decisions by the water cooler but then forget to tell that to everyone else. Or there are just some who don't give feedback directly, just create a little bit of this back channeling, and you find about things later and you feel like you're gossiped upon. So it's like not rocket science. It's most of the things that make us slower and less efficient to operate, and always wondering what's going on. And when I'm going to this meeting, what's happening here? Is this meeting about the agenda that they put there, or is there another agenda? These sort of questions. But I think otherwise our culture is quite straightforward. Sometimes people are surprised that we give feedback very fast and very direct. But I think if anyone lived in Berlin, you get used to that, because people would just stop you on the street and tell you you're dressed too lightly and aren't too cold. It's part of the German culture a bit to give people unsolicited advice because you think you are letting them commit a mistake if you're not telling them, and they think this is way more rude than not saying anything. And I know that the British culture is complete opposite. Is like, oh no, I shouldn't say something. It's not up to me. But it's also an interesting approach, and I got used to it. And I think it's rather cute right now whenever someone stops me and wants to be helpful in this way.
I think that what you say about the German culture, I, people aren't doing it to be rude, but they're doing it because of empathy, because they don't want that person to make a mistake. And I think that's a lovely thing. I think in Britain, we are perhaps too reserved at times with our ability to provide feedback or just to talk to people sometimes. And I think there is a certain reservedness in British culture, and not uniformly. I think it does depend upon where you are in the world, where you are in the UK, but definitely I've become a bit more open and a bit more talkative as I've got older. Whereas before I was very much typical British, like, hey, no, better not say anything because that'd be quite awkward if we were to find out I don't like them. Or I don't like what they're wearing. There's something I wanted to loop back round on. Again, you talk about things being difficult. You spoke about Amazon, about that bar raiser interview, to which I think sounds incredibly rigorous and kind of fun, right? Because then you're really being tested a little bit. When you're interviewing people for product people, or in your experience of working with organizations, seeing how they interview people, have you seen any other good ways to test for cultural fit?
It's pretty hard because when we post-mortem the ones that were not a culture fit, the interviewers were quite good. Everyone will have examples of a difficult stakeholder they had to deal with, or periods when they had a setback, or something where they didn't get along with someone at work. So all of these are already things people can rehearse and come quite prepared with. The other part is, I also don't think people go out straight lying. They just don't know themselves how they're going to react in some situations. And our interim work is way more stressful than product management work in general, which is already quite stressful. So that probably surprises people that they're just like thrown in with a lot of pressure. And then maybe like sometimes it gets out the worst in them and they're like, what happened? I was just like this very nice person in the culture fit call, and all of a sudden I'm raging. So I don't blame them. We just try to also give people a heads up that this is going to be intense, that they're going to be put out of their comfort zone quite a while. One thing I believe Amazon also gets away with this is that they're still paying above 95 percentile, right? So they're in the 95 percentile or 90 percentile pay rate, and then people know, okay, I'm going to prioritize this if they value getting a larger salary that they wouldn't get anywhere else. They're also a large publicly listed company that's kind of known for not being the nicest internally. So that helps. But if a smaller company like ours would do this, I think it will also flood us with very negative Glassdoor reviews. So probably you also, or a smaller company thinks of doing that, you also need to time, okay, what are you going to do after this interview? Because the person will be quite frustrated, right? So they may just like head out and give a negative review, or just send an email that they're dropping out from the process. So probably it needs to be combined with like a follow-up call. So I would tread on that lightly, because the interviewing process is also about you showing the candidate that you're a fit, not necessarily just the candidate showing you that they're a fit.
Yeah.
Which is pretty hard, right? On both sides. Like you're trying to gather as much information as possible, but at the same time, still be liked.
Yeah. But it's really hard. It's really hard. And I think it differs between genders as well. There is some kind of research which shows that actually, we need to be acting differently based upon who we are and who we're being interviewed by as well. It's it's fraught. But I think hiring is one of the most important, if not the most important, decision we can make. And there are huge considerations to make across genders, across geographical boundaries, but then also between generations. There's one of my clients recently is having a real interesting journey recruiting younger people, because their expectations are just so very different. And the people that are hiring are kind of my age, so in their early 40s, who are used to working in a certain way. And the people that they're looking to bring in as they grow very quickly just don't want the type of thing which that company's held dear for so long, because they expect different things. And do you ask people to change, or do you just not end up hiring anyone? It's a very difficult problem to solve, I would say. Well, look, Mirela, thank you so much for coming on. I know that you have to shoot off, but it's been awesome to have you here at long last. I hope that your rest of your day serves you well. Now, if people want to find out more about you, obviously they can find you on LinkedIn, which is where most people are. But is there any other place where they can find information about you?
I would say on the Product People website, we also try to have a few interesting things. And I don't use the other social media profiles that much. So I believe LinkedIn would be the go-to place for rants or stream of thoughts or just getting in touch if they're interested to work at Product People. We also have a cool candidate FAQ page that we've built up from all the questions that we got along the way. And if you want to be a client as well, we have a few case studies on the website to see the type of work that we do.
Brilliant. So if you are a product person who is looking for their next opportunity and are interested in being placed somewhere, check out Product People. Check out some of those FAQs they got in there as well. Or if you're an organization looking for some extra support to bolster you in a time of need, for whatever reason that need has occurred, then yeah, check out Product People. Mirela, thank you very much for coming along. And I do hope that we get to meet in person one day, perhaps at a conference somewhere.
Same.
Well, we've got a little bit more ammunition in our armory now for avoiding product catastrophes. The failure to launch one I found quite interesting. I suppose you're also wondering, Ben, why are you now talking even though the episode's finished? Well, do you know what? I'm recording this just before Christmas and I just want to indulge myself a little bit. I often think to myself, I'd love to be spending more time on the podcast talking about just things that pop into my head. So I want to take this opportunity to say I love the conversation with Mirela. And I love the fact that her experience is quite broad. The things around cultural fit, this failure to launch, I think failure to launch is a huge thing. I don't think people who haven't ever been involved in getting a product live really understand just the level of stuff you got to do. I think the world's full of stories where people just say, oh, it's great. I wrote some software and I released it and it's a resounding success and now I'm a millionaire and I'm on my boat. Yeah, that happens. But having put a couple of products out in market when I was a younger person and looking to get a new one in the market next year, do you know what? If you are on your own, you can write all the code yourself and you don't have to make any investment other than your time, it's not too bad, you can do it. But the moment other people get involved, the moment you're looking at something like a crypto exchange, looking at different legal entities in different countries, shit gets real. It's not as simple as just writing a bit of code and getting it out there. So I would heed everyone. If you're considering getting a product to market, listen to Mirela's advice and do check out some of the stuff on Product People, because who knows, there may be some nuggets on there that will help you get your product to market. And then the second half of the conversation, which at times reminded me very much of my conversation with David Spinks when we were talking about agile across borders, that there are huge cultural differences between not only organizations, but departments within organizations, and then similar departments in the same organization in different countries. I mean, we're all different, right? We all bring something different to the party, and we have to respect each other's differences. But at the same time, let's not pussyfoot around and pretend we can't be honest with people. The only way I believe organizations truly move forward is with dissent and respectful feedback. And there's a fine line between perhaps what people would consider as ruthless versus rigorous. The Amazon bar raising interview, personally, I see that as quite a rigorous thing to do. Some people may say, oh, that's horrible, it's ruthless. Well, if you don't want to be in that type of culture, then fantastic. You'll be in a bar raising interview and you can decide not to continue your progression in that organization. Don't go for that job. But I think it's good when organizations, no matter how brutal or rigorous it may seem, take the effort to make sure you're getting a good cultural fit. Anyway, I thank you for listening to the end and I hope you've enjoyed this short little insight into my mind. Who knows, maybe I'll do some more of these at some point in the future. So, you are fantastic. You are one of our dedicated listeners, and I hope you go back and check out some other episodes. If you haven't listened to the Dave Bowie episode or the Dave Spinks episode, go back and check them out. They are phenomenally good. And that's it, plug done. Look, have a brilliant rest of your day. Enjoy whatever it is you're going to do. And my name is Ben Maynard, and this is the Product Agility Podcast.